one of the reasons I think we can go through Chapter 5 fairly quickly is we've talked about a lot of the debugging features for Visual Studio already. We talked about them in the C# class. They don't change. You know how to create a breakpoint if you want to. All right, there are certain windows that we have looked at that you maybe have not used often, but they're there. All right. Turning up to page 177 in the book. If you look at the top of the screen here, they talk about running your program with debugging or not with debugging. I will just tell you that if you ever get an error and they say, do you want to go on and run the program without debugging? Don't do that. There are errors. You should never run the program without debugging that I can think of. There's no reason to do it. Do you all know this? Please look up on the screen here. I didn't know I closed it, but I did. Great. All right, so if I bring up what we were working on before, that Chapter 3 project. All right, and I bring the whole thing up here. Come on. And I come up here and I grab my default file, etc. You know now that if I click this, it'll run the program. There's nothing new there, nothing surprising. But did you ever notice this before? Up on the top, see where it says Google Chrome? I can click down there and I can run that under any browser that I have loaded. All right, is that a big thing? No, but just so you know that. And I believe you can also click on the project, and I don't know where it is, but there's a way in here that you can also change the browser that you're working with. All right, if you want to do that. Why? Because different browsers, different apps look different in different browsers, especially IE. All right. I'm not going to even go through the link browsers. That's not that big a thing for what we're doing. There are browser developer tools. Now, we didn't talk that much about this, and that's on me. But when you're running your program, so if I run the program right now, there it is. Try to run the program now. In fact, I probably don't even want it running when I do this, but we'll see. Okay, so here's my app running, and I hit F12. We talk about the Chrome developer tools. We should have in the first semester, even if we didn't spend much time talking about them. You can do that in here too. And you can run through anything that's in your program. Now, there's not much in here, but let's pretend for a second that instead of this being gray, this was some really odd color, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I really wanted that. And it was, for some reason, I couldn't get the color. I can click in here, and I can go over to here to styles, and I can find all the information about that particular thing that I'm looking for. So it's the extra CSS that was basically written for me. All right. And you notice how some of these say minus WebKit, minus Moz, etc. Hopefully you remember those. All right. Those are browser extensions, because when you have things that you put onto a website that may not work under all browsers, you may have to add that. So anything that says WebKit, that's Safari and Chrome. Moz is Mozilla, which is Firefox. MS, I believe, is Microsoft. Okay, and I think OP might be Opera. I don't remember. All right. But they talk about that stuff if you're interested in it on page 181. All right. Page 182 and 183 talks about using the exception assistant. Hopefully you remember, because I tried beating this into your heads in other classes, and you'll hear it again in Java next semester. But that said, an exception is not a good thing. So an exception is when the program blows up for some reason. When it shows that, you'll typically get something that looks like this. That is called the exception assistant. There's different things that you can click in here. All right, a lot of times people look at this, oh, get general help for this exception. You'll get a nice message that says this is a general error that can occur for a lot of reasons. All right, you're not going to get really a lot of help typically. It's going to be typically in here. So if you're working on a program, let's say you're working on it at home. It's the weekend. You texted me, or you emailed me, but I didn't get back to you. All right, you get this. You can typically take almost this whole message, sometimes it'll be more than that, and throw that into Google. And a lot of times you'll get an answer to what's wrong. Because you're not, no matter how special you might think you are, any error that you're going to come up with, somebody else has already got it. It's just the way it is. So the exception assistant provides error information for you. All right. How about this? I'm going to stop my run. I'm going to go over to my C# file. I've got to open it first. And I'm going to go in here. What did I just do? Somebody tell me. What did I do? I put a breakpoint in there. All right. The key thing with working with a breakpoint is, let's assume, I'm going to get rid of this line right here, but let's assume right here that I said something like int x equals 24. That's a dumb thing to say, but I'm going to do that. So I'm going to put a thing here that says some code here. So there'd be some extra code. And then down here I say x plus plus. Okay? The reason I'm showing you this is if I want to know the value of x, I should really set the breakpoint on the next line so that line's already fired. Does that make sense? You can't set breakpoints on blank lines. That doesn't make any sense. You can't set breakpoints on comments. That doesn't make any sense. I don't think you can set them on like a curly or things like that. So sometimes I want to set a breakpoint here. You might have to set it on the line above or the line below, depending on where you're trying to set. And click it again, it goes away. If you've got multiple breakpoints set, so if I've got one here, and one here. Remember, breakpoint literally means there's 3 modes that the program can run in. When you're keying stuff in, you're in design mode. When you're running the program, you're in run mode. If you hit a breakpoint, you go into break mode, where the program has stopped running and there's different things that you can do. If I want to get rid of all these breakpoints at once, I believe I can right mouse click on here. Thought it was maybe. And disable breakpoint, delete breakpoint. I thought there was a way to get rid of all of them at once. I don't remember what it is, but it's probably showing. All right. Let's see. To disable all breakpoints, use the debug. You can later enable them, but there's a way to. I thought there was a way. At least there used to be, to delete them all also. So it says when ASP.NET encounters a breakpoint, it enters break mode before it executes the statement on which that thing was set. That's the key thing. All right. And the last thing that's in here, the last few pages, 6, the last 8, 10, 12. Boy, it's a lot longer than I thought it was. The last pages that are in the chapter talk about trace points and using the trace feature. All right. So let me get rid of. I'm going to go back to here and go up to page 187. They do talk in here on 184 about how to use the debugger. So not only do they talk about breakpoints, but a few other things that you can do as well. All right. Visual Studio also provides trace points. Notice what it says. A breakpoint stops when it's hit. A trace point stops, but it allows you to perform actions when that's hit. You can even go in and while your program's running, you can change values of variables. You can do things like that. All right, and you do that using a trace point. When ASP.NET encounters a trace point, it performs an action. Then it continues on. You typically use trace points to print messages to the output window. Now, you may or may not have noticed this, but because for some reason it doesn't let me reset it, but I've got this thing down on the bottom of my screen here. That's your output window. You ever notice that? That literally, when you run a program, it's down at the bottom. If you have errors, that's where it shows. Let's see if this still works. Question mark. Question mark. Why is it not showing me anything here? I don't know. It's not. You can actually go in here and do certain operations. You might have to do it when the program's running. You can print out values of variables and do a bunch of other stuff. All right. A key page in here, at least the most key page in this chapter, is page 189. On page 189, these are the different commands that you can use when you're debugging. So if you hit F5, that's a way to run your program. That's like clicking that green arrow that I always do. Control plus Alt plus break. Notice it stops the program when it's running and it forces it into break mode. Why would you want to do that? Because if you force it into break mode, the key thing here is look at the chart. This line right here. If you put yourself in break mode and you hit the F11 key, you execute your program a line at a time. So if you want to see exactly what's happening, you can keep hitting F11. Now, if you've got a long program, pack a lunch because it's going to take you a while. All right? You can also do what's called step over, which execute, as it says, one statement at a time, except for called methods. So it'll do a whole method at a time. And step out, which allows you, if I had let's say that I put a for loop in my program that was supposed to go through something 1,000 times. And let's say it wasn't just counting it, so it wasn't real fast. If I wanted to break out of it, I could use a step out. All right. So more information on that on page 189. There's also, if you look on page 191, there are two windows called a locals window and a watch window. You may have noticed those, you may never have. When you run the program, what they allow you to do is they will show you the values of current variables that you have in your program. All right? How to use the diagnostic tools, which starts on page 192. I'm asking you this question right here. I want to remove all these breakpoints. If everybody would please, just for a second, look on the screen when I run this. Okay? So you saw a little bit in that output window if you look. But the point is, okay, have you ever done this, been here and gone back to here? That's your diagnostic tools. Now, you might not look at that or really have a reason to use that. But, for instance, that IT guy that we saw yesterday, he can look at this and see different things like how much stress is this program putting on the server, things like that. All right, that's what it's used for. All right, and again, you may never have a reason to use it, but there are things there. So if you've got a program, you can actually do different things with it to try to figure out, hey, my program's running really slow. Is there a certain line or lines that are making that happen? So you can do that kind of stuff. You can go through and look at your program. All right, and the last thing that's in the chapter that goes the last 4 pages, starting on page 194, talks about the trace feature. All right. Now, I'm going to tell you something you probably will never have to care about, but I'm just for completeness sake. Okay? If you look up on your screen right here, this shows you the kind of things that happen when you run the program. If you turn on the trace feature on your computer, we'll go over how to do that in just a minute, but if you turn it on, it shows you everything that's happening as your computer steps through different methods in the program. So you don't even maybe know this, but when the program starts, it goes into the begin pre-init, then to the end pre-init, then the beginning init, then the end init, etc. Why would you care? If you want to have something happen, so let's say, because this actually happened to me when I was doing the key for your program. For some reason, a routine I thought was being called was never being called. And I kept looking at it and I'm like, wow, something's wrong here. So I put a trace in that routine that just at the beginning that just said, hey, it's being called. And I could run through this and I noticed it wasn't ever being called in here. So when it had the list of routines, it was never listed in there. So I knew something was wrong with my logic. Something I thought was happening wasn't happening. So look at this, if you would please. You can set this a bunch of different ways. If I come into any page, you've seen this thing. This is called the page directive that's at the top of every one of your ASPX pages. If you add this, trace equal true, you have to type all of that in. It'll show you all that stuff we just talked about. It's set to false by default, so you don't have to say trace equal false. And that'll show you everything for that page. So if you've got 50 pages and you only want to run it on that page, you put it here. If you want to run it on every page, you go into your web.config file and put that in. That says run that on every page. I will tell you, if you've got 50 pages, it's going to take a while for it to go through everything. But it is a way that you can trace program execution to see what's happening. All right, and related to that, there are two types of messages. If you use a trace.write, as they show on page 197, it writes your message, but it writes your message in black. So it's kind of hard to see because all of the other messages are written in black. Okay? But if instead of saying trace.write, you say, well, it doesn't show it in here. You say trace. I think it's warn, but it might be warning, I don't remember. Then it prints it in red. So it sticks out a little bit more. Does that make sense? All right. So two things we'll do tomorrow. First thing we'll do, provided I get it done, is to go over the test. All right. I'm not sure how people did. I'll have to look at that tomorrow. The good news is my morning class, they have a written test in the morning for the first half an hour. I have to grade that, and the rest of the period is lab. So I should have time to look at all of your programs tomorrow morning. All right? I should have about 3 hours to do that. That should, hopefully with 8 of you, that'll give me enough time. And then after we get done going over the test, so when we get done going over the test, we'll go through the chapter 4 end of chapter exercise that I just gave you. That all makes sense? Ideally, about 2 hours for each. We'll see. If we get done earlier, fine. You can always start on the next section of the book. All right. Questions? So tomorrow, I want everybody to have the chapter 3 stuff done. All right? Everyone who needed a copy told me that they've got a copy now of the code, my code. All right, but we'll do that. And then the chapter 4 stuff, we're going to make that due by the end of the period on Monday. And again, if you need it, I will give you my source for the chapter 4 stuff tomorrow. All right, for anybody who needs it. Jeez, I made it with an hour to spare, a minute to spare. So you'll still have 1 minute to get ready so you can stand by the door. Okay? So I do my best.